We live most of our lives wrapped in the comforting illusion of later, telling ourselves that the dreams we carry in our hearts can be safely postponed until a time that feels more convenient, more stable, or less frightening, and in doing so we trick ourselves into believing that tomorrow is guaranteed, that it will patiently wait for us to gather enough courage or clarity to finally take the steps we've been avoiding. Yet deep down we know that tomorrow is nothing more than a fragile possibility, not a certainty, and the danger in leaning on that illusion is that days turn into months, and months into years until the fire inside us grows dim, replaced by the quiet ache of unfulfilled potential, because the truth is we don't avoid our dreams out of laziness, we avoid them out of fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough, and postponing them allows us to stay safe, to keep them perfect in our imagination without ever risking the discomfort of reality. But what we rarely admit is that safety is costly. It costs us the chance to see who we might become if we dared to act. It costs us the pride of knowing we tried even when success wasn't certain, and it costs us the joy of living fully awake in our own lives, so the illusion of later is not harmless procrastination. It is a thief disguised as patience, stealing the limited time we have under the pretense of abundance. And while we stand still, life keeps moving, seasons keep changing. Opportunities keep passing by, and every unchosen moment writes itself into the story of who we are becoming, not the story of who we long to be. And perhaps the most sobering truth is that many people only realize this when life interrupts with something irreversible, a loss, a crisis, a reminder of mortality that forces them to confront how fragile time really is. And it is in those moments that the illusion shatters, that we see clearly how much power we gave to a tomorrow that never came, and how much we lost waiting for conditions that were never meant to be perfect. But we don't have to wait for tragedy to awaken us. We can choose now. We can refuse to hand our dreams over to a future that may never unfold. We can act in the rawness of today with whatever courage we have, imperfect as it may be, because the only real time we hold in our hands is this moment, this breath, this opportunity to step forward into the unknown and begin shaping a life that won't be defined by what we delayed, but by what we dared to do while we had the chance. The power of now is often underestimated because we are conditioned to believe that the best versions of ourselves exist somewhere in the future, in a place where we have gathered more wisdom, more resources, more courage, and more clarity. But the truth is every breakthrough, every act of courage, every transformation begins in this very moment, not the one we keep postponing or waiting for, because life is not a rehearsal for some grand stage that comes later. It is happening now, unfolding in real time with every choice we make. And when we understand that, we begin to see that waiting for the perfect moment is another form of fear disguised as preparation, that hesitation is simply a way of keeping ourselves from discomfort. But what if the discomfort is exactly where growth lies? What if the leap is the very thing that forges the person we keep imagining ourselves to be? Because the only way to reach that version is to stop holding back in this moment and begin where we stand, messy, unprepared, uncertain, and trembling, yet moving anyway. And when we do, something extraordinary happens. We realize that courage is not a grand event. It's a choice we make in present, sometimes small, sometimes bold, but always real, and each time we choose to show up now instead of waiting, we build trust with ourselves. We prove that we can survive fear, rejection, and imperfection, and in that proving, we unlock the breakthroughs that never could have come by waiting. And it doesn't matter if the step feels tiny. What matters is that it is taken now, because momentum is born in the present, not in the imagined security of tomorrow. And when we learn to treat now as the only time that matters, we begin to live with urgency, not in the sense of panic, but with a deep awareness that this is our one shot to shape the life we long for, that the stories we will one day tell about resilience, love, and courage are not being written in a distant future, but in this breath, this conversation, this decision. And the beauty of it is that no matter how much we've delayed or how far we feel from where we want to be. The doorway to change is always now, always open, always waiting for us to step through. And when we do, we often find that the mountain we feared was far less intimidating than the shadow it cast while we stood still. So the invitation is simple yet profound. Stop waiting for confidence. Stop waiting for perfection. Stop waiting for the elusive right time and choose to begin now, because the power to transform your life, to spark courage, to ignite change, has never lived in tomorrow. It lives here, in this moment that is asking you whether you will use it or waste it, whether you will step forward or stay hidden. And the answer you give will not only shape the day, but the entire trajectory of your life. Courage over comfort is one of the hardest choices we are ever called to make, because comfort whispers to us with the promise of safety, familiarity, and control, while courage demands that we step into the unknown, stripped of guarantees, vulnerable to failure, and open to being seen in all our imperfection. Yet it is only in choosing courage that we discover who we truly are, because growth never resides in the easy places we already know. It waits for us in the spaces where our voice trembles, where our hands shake, where our hearts race with uncertainty. And the truth is that delay often disguises itself as wisdom, making us believe that waiting until we feel more ready is the responsible choice, when in reality it is often fear convincing us to postpone the discomfort of risk. But no amount of waiting can make us fully prepared for the unknown, because courage is not about having all the answers or the perfect plan. It is about stepping forward with what we have right now and trusting that we can figure out the rest along the way. And when we choose courage, we give ourselves permission to be imperfect, to stumble, to learn, and to grow, because the only way to build resilience, confidence, and strength is by walking through the very moments we try to avoid. And while comfort may keep us safe, it also keeps us small, confined within the boundaries of what we already know, while courage, though uncomfortable, expands us, stretches us, reshapes us into people capable of far more than we ever imagined. And every breakthrough, every transformation, every story of triumph is built not in the arms of comfort, but in the fire of courage, where risk and uncertainty press against us and demand that we choose what matters over what is easy. And in doing so, we discover that courage is not about the absence of fear, but about refusing to let fear have the final say, about acknowledging the quiver in our voice and speaking anyway, about feeling the weight of doubt and moving forward anyway, about facing the possibility of failure and deciding that the risk of regret is heavier than the risk of trying. And when we live this way, choosing courage over comfort again and again, we begin to cultivate a life that is not defined by what we avoided, but by what we embraced. A life marked not by safety, but by boldness, not by ease, but by authenticity. And the more we practice courage, the more we learn that the uncertainty we feared was the very soil in which our strength was planted, and the imperfections we tried to hide were the very cracks through which our light could shine. So every time we are faced with the choice between staying in the familiar or stepping into the unknown, we are being invited to live bigger, braver, and truer, and the question becomes not whether we feel ready, but whether we are willing to show up as we are. Imperfect yet determined, uncertain yet willing, because in the end comfort may offer us rest, but only courage offers us freedom. We often build our lives around the avoidance of risk, telling ourselves that failure is the greatest danger we could face, that rejection will break us, that falling short will mark us as incapable. And so we construct walls of hesitation around our dreams, convincing ourselves it is better not to try than to risk losing. But what we fail to recognize in those moments is that the weight of regret is infinitely heavier than the sting of failure, because failure, no matter how painful, teaches us, reshapes us, and gives us stories of resilience, while regret offers nothing but silence and the endless question of what might have been. And that is a burden we carry not for a moment but for a lifetime, echoing through quiet hours when we remember the opportunities we let slip by, the words we never spoke, the steps we never took, and the dreams we left untouched out of fear. And while risk is sharp and immediate, regret lingers, growing heavier with time, suffocating us with the knowledge that we chose comfort over possibility. And it is easy to convince ourselves that safety is wisdom, that avoiding risk is the responsible path. but the truth is that life itself is risk. Every relationship, every pursuit, every act of love or creation asks us to put something on the line, and the absence of risk is not safety but stagnation, a slow erosion of our spirit as we trade aliveness for predictability. And when we look back at our lives from a distance, it will not be failures that haunt us. It will be the moments we refused to even try, the paths we never walked, the songs we never sang, the love we never expressed, and the chances we never dared to claim. Because failure can be healed with time, lessons, and growth. But regret has no cure. It is the permanent bruise left by choices we never made. So when fear rises and tries to convince us that risk is too costly, we must ask ourselves what will weigh more heavily on our hearts: the temporary pain of trying and stumbling, or the lifelong ache of wondering what might have been. And the truth is that even when risk leads to failure, we gain something: wisdom, strength, clarity, resilience that moves us forward, whereas regret leaves us empty handed, with no progress, no lessons, only the hollow space of possibility left unexplored. And so the call is not to live recklessly, but to live bravely, to recognize that every meaningful pursuit will carry the possibility of failure, but also the promise of growth. And when faced with the choice, it is always better to risk failure in the pursuit of what matters than to sit safely on the sidelines watching our lives pass by. Because in the end, stories we cherish most are not of the times we played it safe, but of the moments we dared greatly. And those are the stories that remind us we were alive, that we tried, that we showed up, that we refused to let fear dictate the course of our lives, because regret is the weight of a life unlived, while risk is the price of a life that meant something. We often convince ourselves that change requires grand gestures, sweeping decisions, or dramatic leaps. But the truth is that the greatest transformations rarely come from one enormous act of bravery. They are born from the accumulation of small, consistent choices that seem almost invisible in the moment yet carry the power to alter the direction of our lives. And the challenge is that small steps often feel too insignificant to matter, too ordinary to change anything. So we dismiss them, waiting instead for some extraordinary chance to begin. But in doing so, we overlook the quiet truth that every meaningful journey is built step by step, habit by habit, choice by choice, and while massive leaps may look impressive, it is the steady rhythm of small actions that sustains growth, because consistency carves pathways into who we are, shaping not just our days but our identities, teaching us that progress is not about how far we move at once, but about whether we are willing to keep moving at all. And when we learn to honor the small steps, we free ourselves from the weight of perfection, from the belief that we must have it all figured out before we start, because a single step forward taken today is infinitely more powerful than 1,000 plans we promise ourselves will begin someday. And the beauty of small steps is that they build trust within us. They show us that change is possible, that discipline is possible, that growth is possible, and over time, those steps compound, weaving together into momentum that feels unstoppable, and suddenly we find ourselves in places we once thought were impossible to reach, not because we leapt across the distance in one bound, but because we were willing to walk it with patience and persistence. And those small steps lack the thrill of instant transformation. They carry something far more enduring: the quiet power of progress that lasts, the kind of change that does not fade because it has been built into the fabric of who we are becoming. And when doubt creeps in and tells us that our efforts are too small to matter, we must remember that rivers carve canyons not with one massive rush of water, but with steady flow over time, that seeds do not bloom overnight, but grow root by root, inch by inch, until the day they finally break through the soil, and that our lives are no different, because greatness is not created in a single moment, but in the repeated decision to keep showing up, to keep taking steps, no matter how small they may seem. And when we look back one day, it won't be the single leap that defines us, but the collection of steps that we were brave enough to take when no one was watching. When no instant reward was visible, when all we had was faith that these tiny acts mattered, and that is the secret. Small steps not only change our circumstances, they change us, they transform our self-belief, they teach us that we are capable of building something extraordinary out of ordinary days, and in the end, it is not the size of our actions that shapes our destiny, but our willingness to keep moving forward, one choice at a time. We often think of legacy as something distant, something that belongs to the future, a final chapter written at the end of our lives. But the truth is our legacy is not waiting for us somewhere far ahead. It is being created in every moment we live right now, in the choices we make, the words we speak, the risks we take, and the way we treat people when no one is watching. And this can be both sobering and empowering because it means that every action, no matter how small, is a brushstroke on the canvas of the story we leave behind. And while it is tempting to imagine that someday we will finally become the person worthy of leaving an impact, someday we will find the courage to love more deeply, forgive more easily, pursue what matters more boldly. The reality is that our story is being shaped not by intentions or future promises, but by the way we are living right now, today, in this ordinary moment. And the danger in waiting for the future to define our legacy is that we forget that each present moment is slipping by, and once it passes, it becomes the past that will be remembered, whether or not we acted with intention. And the truth is that the most powerful legacies are not built by grand gestures or monumental achievements alone. They are built by consistent choices rooted in authenticity, by showing up with integrity even when it costs us, by choosing kindness when it is easier to be indifferent, by daring to step forward when it would be more comfortable. Stay silent, because these are the moments people carry with them. These are the stories that ripple outward and continue shaping lives long after we are gone. And while we might think that legacy is about reaching a certain level of success, what people often remember most is how we made them feel, whether we inspired them to live braver, whether we gave them hope in their darkest hour, whether we stood firm in our values when compromise would have been simpler. And the paradox is that by living fully present, by investing our hearts and energy into today, we not only create meaning for ourselves, but also lay down the foundation of a legacy that will outlast us, because legacy is not written someday in a grand finale. It is written now in the small, ordinary choices that add up to a life of significance. So the question is not what story will we leave someday, but what story are we writing in this moment, because this moment will become part of the memory others hold of us. And if we want to leave behind a story of courage, love, generosity, and strength, then we must live those qualities right now, not in some imagined future, but here, where our actions matter, where our words echo, where our presence touches the lives around us, because every breath we take is a chance to write another line in the story of who we are becoming. And someday when others look back, they will not see a legacy that appeared all at once. They will see the thread of moments we wove together through our daily choices, and those moments, lived with intention, will be the story that outlives us.